Today, we are commemorating the great queen of Ethiopia, Elesbaan. And Elesbaan is an interesting account because Elesbaan, being the king of Ethiopia at a time in which the persecution of Christianity in Arabia was happening and very strong. And Elesbaan, out of his zeal, moved against this invasion and the persecution of Christians. And he mustered his army, and he went out against those persecutors of Christians. And yet he was conquered. He was defeated. And he began to wonder, why is it that he had failed in his noble task? And in his sorrow, it was revealed to him that he had, although the right, shall we say, action, what was in fact the problem was the wrong motivation. He moved out on his own strength, in his own will, and in most respects we could say he moved out for his own vengeance. He was offended by what was happening. But like with anything else, unless the Lord builds the house, the labors in vain, as the scripture says. And so in his seeking of the Lord, understanding the meaning behind his defeat, the Lord reveals to him that vengeance is mine, thus saith the Lord. That in fact, if he was to move out in a righteous act, it had to be with the blessing of the one who is righteous and for the sake only of the one who is righteous and not his own will. And so interestingly enough, this sorrow that he suffered, this defeat that he suffered, was ultimately the thing that was to bring him joy. Because in that sorrow, he was forced to come to this place where he actually sought the Lord, and the Lord heard him. The Lord met him. The Lord blessed him, and then Elesbaan again went out. But this time, he went out with the blessing of the Lord. He went out on the Lord's strength and not his own strength. And he went out with the strength and the encouragement of a vow. And this vow that he made was, if he was to be granted victory, that he would end his days consecrated unto the Lord. And so with the strength of this vow, and no longer on the strength of his own will, Elesbaan went out again with his army, but this time he was completely victorious. And thus, not only did he deliver the Christian nations there in Africa and in Arabia from this persecution, more importantly, he secured the blessing of God in his own life. We see so often in our lives, we too are like Elesbaan. We have good ideas. We have maybe some good motivations. We love God. We go to church. We're, Orthodox. And we are, shall we say, moved by our zeal. But our zeal oftentimes takes the place of actual prayer. Actual prayer. In our zeal, we can begin to assume we know the will of God. In our zeal, we begin to assume, well, clearly God would want this because I want it. Clearly God would want this because, well, it's Christian, isn't it? I'm wearing a cross. I go to church. Today we are also commemorating the icon of the Mother of God, the joy of all who sorrow. the joy of all who sorrow. And interestingly enough, today, the sorrow that Elesbaan suffered at his defeat is actually the very thing that brought him to the place of true joy. Because he was able actually to hear the will of God instead of assuming what the will of God was. Elesbaan in his good intentions was deluded. But in his sorrow, he found the great joy of actually finding the will of God. Through the prayers of the great King Elesbaan, and through the intercessions of our Holy Lady, the Theotokos, may the Lord grant us to know the joy of his will and never to be mistaken for our own desires.